From a personal development standpoint, I mean, yes, you're a salesperson, but I think you've tried to develop yourself in a number of different areas. How does that tie in? Is it totally separate? Would you recommend that for other people? And what has your journey been like on the personal development side?
Personal development side, I went all in roughly about 4 years ago. I'd say every person in the world should possibly be able to do it, because when we're raised, we're actually trained how to do a job. We're never trained how to actually think for ourselves, because most of I call things like stories, like 90% of the pain and suffering that people go through is due to stories, not facts. So when they go ahead and they're looking at things, like if they could just adjust the stories they're telling themselves, you'd be amazed at how different things going. So prime example, I was talking to a buddy of mine. He was freaking out because he's like, oh my God, I'm scheduling a couple different meetings at the same time. Business owners are going to be mad at me. They're going to be frustrated about what's going to happen because I'm so unprofessional. He starts telling me stories.
Right.
And I'm like, let me ask you a question. Did they physically say that to you? No, but I think that's what they're going to think. I'm like, okay, is that a story, my friend? Right. He's like, well, can you prove that they actually said these things to you? He's like, no. And he's like, well, okay. And then all I know is that he tells me a couple of days later, his girlfriend calls him because she's late. She's freaking out. And he said, I used the same thing you just told me, which was like fact or story. He's like, that's the most powerful thing I've ever learned in my entire life, was recognizing that the stories that we tell ourselves 9 times out of 10 aren't true. Because your brain is literally designed to re-remember areas where things are incomplete. So that's why people can remember more about the games they lost than the games they won. Because the brain is literally designed to do that. So if you understand that stories are empowering if you use them properly. So if the brain only understands stories, then start telling the stories you want to tell it. Right. And start being there. And that's how it empowered me, that when my boss is upset or frustrating or asks me questions or being able to do things, it's not because, as some people say, oh, my boss is a jerk or he's being able to do these things. It's because that's how he's wired. That's all he knows. That's all he knows how to communicate. That's all he knows how to be able to do things. So if I would just remove the stories and say, what's the fact? The fact he wants to know is does this information help him manage up? Right. Does this, and so it removes all that boundaries to where I'm not going home and taking home like work home with me and going like, oh, my boss hates me. I'm frustrated. I need to work harder. I need to spend more hours. I need to be the best at the job, because if I'm not the best, I'm not crap. And it's like, it took away all those elements and recognizing that my value in life is me. And not in a selfish way, you got to love yourself, because if my cup's not overflowing, how can I give to my family? Right. How can I give to my customers? How can I give to my friends if it's not supporting there? So I began this period of time of just making sure I have time scheduled to connect with people per day, minimum. Doesn't matter what's going on, I'm connecting with somebody new. And reading and meditating and spending time talking to my wife and having conversations with family members once a week, because that's what helps me sustain. Any elite athlete has certain foods, has certain rituals, has certain things they do. And if I choose to be an elite sports professional, like when it comes to sales, then that means that I need to set those same things up for me. And if it wasn't for personal development, I would have never understood those things. Right. Because now I'm training myself to think, and I'm doing things because I want to. I don't have to buy the fancy suit. I'm not a suit guy. Like, it's like, I don't need to have this whole assortment of ties, because first of all, I don't work in the financial sector, but because I don't like ties. Right. And you begin to realize the things that you do, because find any entrepreneur and they'll tell you 100 people in the room, 100 different ways they were able to do what they want to do. Most key important quality for those who attain over long term and have great success is they did things based upon what works for them. Right. Yeah. Right. And finding your value. I heard an exercise the other day that I loved. Was take out a piece of paper and write I am, and then 10 times. I am, a salesperson. I am a husband. I'm a father. Get down to 10. Okay, now do another 90. Get down to 100. Right. That totally shifts things, because what happens is we create an identity of ourselves based on the world around us, what other people think, right? Yeah. And when you finally whittle it down to, who you really are, and all these other things, you don't care about what other people think. You're not trying to change, be a chameleon to, impress other people. And that comes from personal development, but like you said, it helps in sales, it helps in business, it helps in your personal relationships, right? So I think going down that path is so important, and a lot of people just miss that because they say, I don't need the personal development stuff. I don't need that. I'm a salesperson. I'm a business person. I don't need that self-help crap or stuff like the psychobabble. And I'm like, okay, you can live your life a certain way, But success without fulfillment is the greatest tragedy. And I've always believed that. I've always been there. And I'm like, because if we look at the people we spend time around are the people we become. So I was always particular about those that I spent a ton of time around. What type of life are they living? And not just what you see like in the highlight reel, like how important is family to them? How important is their health to them? How important is the relationships they have? And Zig Ziglar, this is kind of like the last thing I remember, Zig Ziglar talking about, this guy called him and said, hey, I want to come spend a day with you. And he was like, I don't really, like, I'm really boring. You're not going to find things out. You kind of do the same stuff over and over again. He's like, I'm going to give you $50,000 to spend a day with you. He was like, I think my calendar just opened up. So the guy comes down to him and he's like, Zig, I just want to be so successful as like my bosses. He's like, well, let me ask you a question. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, like financially, how do you think? He's like, oh, he's so successful. He's like, I know a couple guys here that are worth over $1 billion. Is he that successful? He's like, well, no. He's like, I know a couple guys that have at least like 50 to 100 million. Is he that successful? He's like, no. He's like, but he's so successful. He's like, all right, like how much do you think he's worth? He's like 2 million. He's like, okay, that's fine. He said, how about his relationships? Like, does he have great like friendships and be able to do stuff that you see him in like engage? And he's like, no, not really. He doesn't have any friends. He just works. And he's like, okay, like how about like do the employees love him and want to be around him? They're like, no, they can't stand him. He's kind of a jerk, but he's just so successful. He's like, what about like his health? Is he good? And they were like, well, no, he's kind of overweight. He's always having like health issues and stuff. He said, all right, last question. How about his family? Do his parents like, no, his wife couldn't stand him, so she left. The kids don't really talk to him, but he's just so successful. He said, look at all those numbers. Rate them from a scale of 1 to 10. Like we looked at family, we looked at relationships, we looked at health, we looked at wealth, and he was only a 4 on wealth compared to everybody else, and everything else was a 1. And he said, let me ask you a question. The next 5 years, is that what you want your life to look like? And he goes, absolutely not. He said, you may want to change your definition of successful. When I recognized that, I said, okay, in order for me, because I believe you can have cake and ice cream. I eat it all the time. You can totally do it. It's allowed, especially in the time we live in. I go, all right, relationships, having great relationships, having kids and family that love me, being in excellent physical fitness shape and having excellent financial health. Like, why can't I have it all? And then I find people that either have most of it or some of it, and I build a team of mentors around me to have all of those different elements, and I'm very particular about that. And if it wasn't for personal development, I wouldn't have had those awarenesses to be able to know that, okay, I am building all these things effectively, and I build all those first, and then work comes after that.
Right.
And that's when work gets scheduled in, and that's when entrepreneurship gets scheduled in. Because without any of those things, the hell am I building it for?